Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered why some people just seem to fit in at work while others feel like outsiders, even when they're doing the same job? Today we're diving into some fascinating research that uses social networks to understand workplace, inclusion, and that all-important feeling of belonging. This paper explores this really important idea of inclusion at work. We know that organizations want to be diverse and fair, but sometimes just having different people isn't enough. Real inclusion means everyone feels like they belong. The researchers here noticed that while we talk a lot about diversity and equity, inclusion is still a bit fuzzy. It is defined in different ways, which makes it hard to figure out how to actually build it. So what did they do? They created a framework to connect how organizations try to be inclusive, how people interact in networks at work, and how individuals feel like they belong. They define inclusion as the organizational stuff, the structures, policies, and practices that help people feel like they belong. And belonging, they say, comes from feeling valued, feeling like there is reciprocity, and feeling like you fit in. The big idea is that organizational inclusion practices change the way people interact at work in their social networks. And these networks then shape that feeling of belonging. Think about Monroe Gamble, a Black research assistant at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. He was the first African American to hold that position. Even though he had experience, he felt out of place, like nobody could see him. It took a toll, and he was looking to leave. Luckily, he connected with the Fed president, Mary Daly, who came from a similar background, and with her support he thrived. This story really highlights how important those connections, those social networks, are for feeling included and that sense of belonging. This paper argues that without paying attention to these connections, organizations risk losing great people. Why does this matter so much? Well, workplaces that are inclusive see less turnover, more employee involvement, and more creative ideas. When you feel like you belong, you identify more with the company, you are more committed, more motivated, and you perform better. It's a win-win. On the flip side, exclusion, being left out, has serious negative effects. Studies show that people who experience exclusion help others less, cooperate less, and it can even harm their thinking and mood. Prolonged exclusion can lead to loneliness, depression, and ultimately, people leaving the organization. The researchers noticed there is a lot of different ways people talk about inclusion. Some focus on how someone feels, others on the organization's actions, and still others on how different viewpoints negotiate power. They wanted to bring some order to this by linking organizational actions to individual feelings, with social networks acting as the bridge. At the individual level, they focus on the psychology of belonging. This is that fundamental human need to feel connected to others. You need to feel like your contributions are valued, like there is a give and take in your relationships, and that you fit in with the group. When you feel this, your well-being and job performance get a boost. One key part of belonging is feeling valued. This means being recognized and respected for what you do. When a manager trusts you with more responsibility or acknowledges your contribution, it signals that you are valued, and that helps you feel like you belong. Another piece is reciprocity. This is about the give and take in your relationships. You contribute and you receive something back, whether it is support, effort, or emotional connection. If relationships are one-sided, it can cause problems. Think about leader-member exchange theory, or LMX. High-quality relationships between managers and employees are based on trust and give and take, leading to better outcomes. And then there is fit. This is that feeling of being compatible with the organization and its people. It can be about shared values, beliefs, or even just feeling like you have the same kind of experiences as others in similar roles. When you fit in, your self-concept improves, and you feel less threatened by workplace interactions. Now, how do organizations create this sense of belonging? Through their inclusion efforts. This includes things like diversity and inclusion training to reduce bias, inclusive leadership that shows openness, and creating psychological safety, where people feel comfortable sharing ideas. Formal policies against discrimination, fair performance reviews, and equal access to resources all play a part. These practices help build a culture where employees feel valued, supported, and like they belong. The really interesting part is how organizations' attempts to foster belonging often work through social networks. Think about it. Interactions are the lifeblood of any organization. This figure shows how inclusion at the organizational level influences social networks, which then impact a person's feeling of belonging. For example, when you start a new job, inclusive onboarding practices connect you with different colleagues and mentors. This helps you build relationships and access information and support faster. Mentorship programs connect you with influential people, boosting your visibility and sense of belonging. Employee resource groups provide community and support. Even cross-departmental projects can broaden your network and integrate diverse voices. So, how can we measure this? Social network analysis gives us tools. It looks at things like how central you are in a network, how many mutual connections you have, and how similar your network position is to others. One way to measure how valued you are is through your network centrality. Simply put, this is how well connected you are. If lots of people turn to you for information or advice, it signals that your knowledge and skills are valuable. In this example, person B is much more central. This greater connection often means more access to information, which is a social asset. Research shows that people who are more central in information and advice networks tend to have a greater sense of belonging. Being sought out makes you feel known and respected. The second element is reciprocity, which we can look at through bidirectional ties. This means both people in a connection acknowledge and value the relationship. In this image, person A is giving a lot, but not getting much back. It is a one-sided relationship. But here, all the ties are two-way. This mutual exchange is much more likely to lead to a strong sense of belonging. Studies show that students with more reciprocal friendships have a greater sense of belonging. If your contributions are met with similar contributions, you feel more included. The third part of belonging is fit, and we can look at this through structural equivalence. This means having peers who are connected to the same people you are. In this image, person A has unique connections, but here A and B are structurally equivalent. They share the same social circles and are exposed to similar information. This shared experience can make you feel like you fit in, boosting your sense of belonging. Now, here is where it gets really important. Access to these social resources isn't equal. People from marginalized groups often have less access to powerful networks. This isn't just about them being different. It reflects broader societal inequalities. Marginalized workers, including Black American workers, often experience higher rates of exclusion and feel less belonging than their majority group peers. So, how do these networks affect marginalized workers? First, marginalization can reduce your network centrality, meaning you are less connected. Negative stereotypes can make others less likely to build ties with you, contributing to this reduced centrality. This means fewer opportunities for recognition and praise, making you feel less valued. Importantly, people from marginalized groups might also be less likely to initiate ties because they fear fewer rewards due to stereotype threat. This can create a cycle of lower centrality and less belonging. This study, even though it is about gender, shows how being integrated into the classroom social network, not just psychological factors, led to better negotiation outcomes for women. This highlights how feeling connected impacts success. Marginalization can also hinder the formation of reciprocal ties. People tend to connect with others like them, called homophily. Because marginalized groups are often underrepresented, they have fewer opportunities to form close, reciprocal relationships with peers from their own background. This lack of reciprocity can diminish their sense of belonging. And lastly, less structural equivalence can make marginalized individuals feel like they don't fit in. If stereotypes make it harder to build connections, or if homophily leads them to connect more with their own group, their networks might look different from those in similar roles. This dissimilarity can lead to different information and experiences, contributing to a feeling of not fitting in. Even more complex marginalization can actually change how much a network position benefits someone. For example, studies show that even if you are central in a network, if those networks are dominated by the majority group and don't include you in key ways, the benefits might not translate to you. Being visible can be good, but for members of marginalized groups, it can also mean more scrutiny. This is called hypervisibility, the feeling of being constantly watched and judged. This can lead to pressure to conform, to code switch, and can actually weaken the link between being central and feeling valued. Reciprocal ties might also offer less benefit. While reciprocity generally builds belonging, if the conversations with majority group members highlight differences, or if expressing your authentic self is risky, those reciprocal ties might not create the same sense of connection. In fact, research shows that for Black professionals, building ties with other Black professionals can offer unique benefits that boost their sense of belonging more than ties with non-Black colleagues. This paper offers a roadmap for future research. We need to empirically test these links between organizational inclusion practices, social network structures, and individual belonging. We need to understand which inclusion practices are most effective at shaping networks and how they do it. We also need to figure out if the network structures we discussed, centrality, reciprocity, and structural equivalence, are indeed key to belonging, and if they work the same for everyone. Field experiments could introduce new inclusion practices and track their effects on networks and belonging over time. A crucial area is understanding how organizations can foster belonging specifically for marginalized workers. We need to see how things like hypervisibility or invisibility can be measured and addressed through network analysis. And finally, we can develop interventions that reshape social networks to boost belonging. This could involve mentorship programs, or even using technology to help people find structurally equivalent peers. The goal is to intentionally design networks that promote inclusion. Of course, changing networks isn't always simple. It could lead to resistance or unintended consequences. So researchers need to study the systemic effects of these interventions to make sure they benefit everyone. The big takeaway from this research is that inclusion isn't just about formal policies. It is deeply shaped by the informal social networks at work. These networks influence who has access to resources, mentorship, and opportunities. By understanding these network dynamics, organizations can better diagnose and address the hidden barriers to inclusion, especially for those who have historically been on the margins. It's about building workplaces where everyone truly feels they belong. What do you think? Have you experienced this yourself? Feeling like you didn't quite fit in at work, or seen how important your network of colleagues is? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of the fascinating world of psychology and human behavior. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.